herself of the overshoot. So therefore, I think it's easier to go with the collapse. That didn't make the recording, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's a natural reaction to actions that have been taken. It's one of the only universal laws we really know, is that there is an equal and opposite reaction to every action taken, and everything done by humans there will be a reaction to that. You can look at it however you want. You could look at it as good, or you could look at it as bad, but it still is
Yeah.
what it is at the end of the day. And it's a law way beyond way beyond us, our will. So
Yeah, it reminds me of maybe 10 years ago. I was talking with some people about whether or not agriculture was sustainable. Sustainable in the old unmolested sense, where it can go on, and not the Brundtland United Nations sense that was favorable to growth economy. So the thing is that it seems to us like agriculture is sustainable because it takes a long time before it collapses, before it crashes to the ground, like we see now, right? So I liken that to one of the earliest pioneers who tried to fly by jumping off a cliff with some plastic wings or something, back in the 1910s or around there. And it's kind of the same thing, only that takes only 10 seconds before you crash to the rocks below and die. But you can imagine for yourself that you're flying, you have invented the first flying machine during those 10 seconds. So the only difference between those two, because both the plastic wings of this guy and the agriculture as sustainable are wrong, or just unsustainable. So sooner or later it will crash and burn. It just seems to us humans living only short lives that 10,000 years of agriculture is forever.
Well, Hugh used to say that overshoots happened at the time of the American Civil War. So we've been flying for quite a while now, the last few generations, and haven't we?
Yeah, and interestingly, because we mentioned the Vikings series on Netflix in the previous conversation we had here, and what I was going to say there was that the main reason that at least some of the Vikings in West Norway went out and plundered and occupied and fought wars and stuff was that West Norway was already in overshoot. They'd figure out how to have cattle and have agriculture and stuff, and they were so successful at it, and they couldn't feed all their children, and that's kind of the only reason they left wonderful Norway for England and the Western Islands, is because they had reached their ecological limit, so they had to spread out like a cancer, like humans always do. So that's kind of the back history of why the Vikings did what they did. It's not an excuse, but it's just so that we know that we've been in overshoot since the 800s, yeah.
Yes, because what stopped them in France, where I grew up, and I learned that in history because I grew up in a part of the country called Normandy, and the history of that place is that the King of France, to stop the Vikings from plundering the rest of France, gave Normandy to the Viking king of the time, and they settled in Normandy, and then they stopped because they had land and they could have cattle and they were great land, very lovely for cows and agriculture. So they settled there, and that was it.
Yeah, and I actually kind of solved the big Greenland mystery half a year ago, because the same reason that I went to England and Scotland and Ireland and Iceland and stuff. It's the same reason I went to Greenland initially, and I were there for like 500-600 years or something. And every scholar and academic paper in the world is kind of scratching their head and saying, "Oh, how did they disappear? What happened? What happened?" So I was just looking at the picture of the last wedding in a church in West Greenland. That is all over the internet. And the last guy to marry in Greenland, had my name, Torstein. So, but the thing is, he was an Icelandic fisherman. So the first thing they did after they married and he was allowed to kiss her and stuff was to go straight back to Iceland. And this is the last sort of dated, that we know the date and the year for when this happened, in the 1340s or something, or 1320s, I don't know. So of course this is the age of the Black Death, the big pest, and the presence of this Icelandic fisherman at this wedding in Greenland at that time, that tells you that they had news from Iceland and Norway. They had connection over the sea, right? And I think that everybody who lived from Norway to Shetland to Iceland to Ireland and to Greenland spoke the same language, and they were actually in the same kingdom. They paid taxes to the same king, right? So what do you do when you hear that half the farms in Norway and Iceland are empty because of the plague? Well, of course, you go back to Iceland and Norway. So there's no mystery at all. It's just they got news that there was no longer any reason to be in Greenland because there was plenty of free land to retake, home in Norway and home in Iceland. So that's actually why they, over 80 or 100 years, gradually depopulated Greenland, because there were better options in other parts of the country or the kingdom. So that's kind of interesting. I think I may be the only guy to figure that out. Everybody is sort of still asking themselves the question. And if you look at Wikipedia for Greenland disappearance or depopulation or something, they're still sort of scratching their head and having 3 different theories and stuff. Maybe they went to America, maybe they were captured by Spaniards, or it's kind of stupid because these people just moved to better areas.
There was also a theory too that some historians wrote about the fact that the most of the people in Greenland who were still having a sort of agriculture, who kept cows and who had to do it in a very, very difficult conditions, and they were entirely dependent on sea connections with Northern Europe. And when, for different reasons in Europe, war, illness, whatever, the sea connection was interrupted, a lot of those little farms and colonies died. And some, as you say, go away. I mean, I don't know if you know about that theory too, but
yes, that's kind of the mainstream, at least in Norway.
Okay, I didn't know.
They found knives and axes and stuff which were used until there was no metal, no blade left almost. So it indicated that they'd been without contact or without trading contact with Norway for quite a long time. So they didn't get new supplies and new metal and new knives and stuff. And yeah, so it's a long debate, long story. But basically, it's very hard to drive a farm here in Greenland compared to, let's say, Denmark or Scotland or Norway. So it's as long as you still have family ties and stuff in those other areas of the kingdom, for instance in Iceland, then it's almost like a newspaper or a news feed that you have this giant farm over there in East Greenland that is free and nobody living there. So of course you go there. You take your newly wedded wife and go and settle there because there are no people. There's no people there. So basically the old problem of the overshoot was solved almost by the plague, and therefore they could return, right? So that's my interpretation anyway, my top theory.
Yeah, but tying into overshoot, you see, it's nearly the same thing as nowadays. Like, okay, except that nowadays there's only guys like Elon Musk or thing like that think they're going to go onto another planet or, to start a new colony because they fucked up the earth so much that nobody will be able to live on it. But it's these people continue to apply agriculture industry. They didn't consider 1 minute watching the hunter-gatherers around them, how they lived, and trying to imitate them. They wanted to continue their techniques and their, it was it's nearly the same. That overshoot is actually we're nearly talking about the same thing as today.
I think it really is the same thing. It's the alien cortex sort of at the heart of all of it, thinking linearly, thinking in terms of growth, all that. It's like any kind of sort of what would you call it? Genetic flaw or whatever in a species. Some species throughout history had a certain trait that led them to reproduce too quickly for the environment around them, and nature just kind of corrects for that. It corrects in all different kinds of ways, but it's shooting 100% when it comes to correcting for unsustainability. So yeah, it's all the same thing. But yeah, I think you can find the antidote for a lot of that. At least it helps me. I know Hugh would always talk about the antidote for that being things like Catalonia, 1937 or whatever it was, or some of these other societies that sprung up in crises. But at least for myself, it really helps to think about the antidote for that being, like Sophie, you're saying, the hunter gatherer types. To read how folks like the Piraha and stuff thought about the world, because they didn't do the same thing. A lot of those folks lived in the same place for tens of thousands of years with no overshoot. Or if there was overshoot, it was maybe limited to this place or that place. But by and large, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of generations of essentially the exact same thing. Um, and yeah, that's where I think you can really learn a whole lot of lessons. If there's one thing I wish Hugh had talked about more, it was sort of those types of folks and how they saw the world. Because yeah, I just think there's so much to learn, and it's such an opposite view on the world as what we have in the West, and the common view that all of these civilizations and empires and stuff that always crash and burn have. Um, yeah.
Well, the overpopulation not only is from the agriculture but settlement. So if you settle and you're farming, you can have like 6 kids, and if you're a hunter gatherer, a woman can probably only carry one baby or two when they're nomadic and moving around. I'm not sure exactly, but I can imagine you can't have 6 kids if you're like one man, one woman can't sit there and have 6 kids in hunter gatherer because you can't transport or carry all those babies with you when you're trying to follow the herd. So
Yeah, no, I think all of those kinds of natural factors were what limited it. A lot of people like to try to think, what were their practices, or what was a rule that we can implement, like, China one child policy or whatever. It doesn't work. What you're doing is imposing the alien cortex on nature. Um, just the natural lifestyle that those folks lived just meant that, yeah, you couldn't have you couldn't have, like you're saying, 6 mouths to feed. You could not feed 6 children if, you're living day to day, seeing what food you can get. They some of them would just literally starve. So yeah, nature would impose the limitations there.
Yeah, it's because you have to move if you're a hunter gatherer and follow your prey. It's funny
Mhm.
too because a lot of people think that the dynamic in a wolf pack is oppressive, where only two wolves can have cubs. But that's not like it's not a dominance thing. They can only feed one litter of cubs, and even like half of them die because it's not easy following elk around and hunting them. So, and also prevents inbreeding too. But yeah, it's not oppressive. They can't feed multiple litters of cubs in one wolf pack, so that it's a practical issue too.
My experience with nomadic people was with tribes in the Sinai Desert with Bedouins, and these people have been living there since for thousands and thousands of years. They populate well, of course, they lived there when their ancestor was probably living there when it was quite still fertile and green, but the people I know are adjusted to life in the desert, and they know they're semi-nomadic, which means that they leave camps with women and children usually, and they go around doing their thing, whether it's trading or doing things that are not always very honest, or else fishing in the Red Sea, or doing all sorts of businesses and stuff. And nowadays, but the thing that I learned from them was just how much they love their life, and how much they would not, how little they own. They've no material possessions. They have no idea of ownership of land or property. There's no limits on, even if there's tribes, there's about 32 or 37, I can't remember, tribes in the Sinai. Each of them has a name and a chief, but there's no hierarchy. There's no limits. The tribes know where they have wells and beaches and, but it doesn't mean that it's my place and you can't come onto my place. It's just because traditionally that's where they settle their tents, and when they sometimes have little gardens, because they have sometimes they're not. It's difficult to be a gatherer in the desert because you need sometimes help a little bit grow a few things, but they move their gardens around. They don't stay in a place. But what I realized is how much they love their life. They love what they're doing, everything they do, and they are looking with a lot of example. I remember being on the beach one day with one of the old men, and we were looking across, and we could see Saudi Arabia across, and they are the same origin, the same language, the same culture. And I was saying, "Oh, do you ever go over there?" He said, "No, it's full of idiots." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because look at them. They don't know how to ride a camel. They can't make bread in the desert. They can't find their way with the stars. They're total idiots." And that's the way they look at humanity in general. And they were staring at the lights across, that they were starting to see lights, because it was very obscure at the beginning when I went there. But they started to have, because the Saudis were building terminals and stuff across, and they can see that world closing upon them, but they just, like, nobody can survive where they live anyway, because the Sinai, if you don't know the desert, if you're dead. Like the tourists from Egypt who go down there, if they don't have a guide, they'll just die of hunger, thirst, cold, or whatever, because it's very high. So but they are totally in communion with their world. They know where to find wood if they need to make a fire, but they will always take a dead branch off a tree. They know how to bake bread with the sand, under the sand, when the sand gets very hot. They put their bread underneath. I've eaten some, so I've seen how it is. They sleep outside a lot. They don't own anything. Their possessions sometimes is a watch, a change of clothes, and now a mobile phone, because they have them now. But you could put what they have in their I've been into their tents and into their huts, and you could put anything they have in a little bag, and that's all they possess. Yeah.
Well, that's inherent to that lifestyle, isn't it? If you're living nomadically, you only can have what you can literally carry on your back. Otherwise,
And it's
you
the
wouldn't.
same with the children, because there's no rules. It's just an automatic regulation that comes from centuries of tradition, knowing they know that a lot of women don't live, the couples don't live together very much. They don't see each other very much. So the opportunities for sex are obviously diminished. They have children, they go back to see the wife now and again, but it's not, they don't cohabit very much, and the women have a parallel life to the men. A lot of the women live on the north coast, which is milder near the Med. A lot of the men are inside or in the South Sinai, and they go back and over camels, cars, horses, whatever. So they can live apart for months. So there is automatically family planning there. The young men I met, the men that would be in their 20s to 30s, would be in age of marrying. A huge majority of them would not marry when I was there, because there was starting to be war or problems in the north with some Islamist. They considered that as very bad time to have children. So we're not going to get married, even though the mothers were, oh, you have to get married. But they were saying, no, we're not having children now. It's not a good time for having children. It was not because they just had made a decision. They knew exactly what actually, it's amazing to see how a guy of 18 would be talking to you like a man of 50. It had already got all an idea of the world. He knew exactly, and yeah, so the children regulation is I suppose, I guess, with the Pirajas and with other hunter-gatherers is of the same nature. It's not a rule. It's something that because it's survival.
Yeah, it's less the way I think about it. The world you live in, and we all live in here in the West, and it mostly goes for the entire globe at this point, is a world where the laws that govern all of your actions on an everyday basis are the laws of the alien cortex. So it's laws that are written into stone. Literally, they're written into the Constitution, they're written into all this stuff, and that in all of its manifestations, that governs your actions on a day to day basis. In those types of societies, in those environments, it's sort of the opposite. The laws that are governing you are just the laws of nature. And it's not to say that they didn't sort of come up with their own customs and traditions and some of the taboos and whatnot, but it's more like those things developed organically out of living under the constraints of nature. Um, GB says laws are the Leviathan's ways, they're not life ways. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Leviathan being the global industrial system that we live under, the alien cortex system. But yeah, the things that governed everyday behavior were just natural rather than alien cortex derived. I find that that's sort of the easiest, simplest way of looking at it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
it
sense. And it was also interesting that what you described, Sophie, was that the Sinai people or the desert people were semi-nomadic, because I remember in one of those series of videos that Lord Hugh had, he was saying that the real, I don't know, in my mind, that the real boss that maintains civilization is the female sex, because it's very hard for women to not have a camp, to like DB said, to carry offspring, while traipsing around and moving about. So that's just very interesting. And to MM's point about the loss of nature and the loss of the alien cortex, like I know I read one time that there's natural family planning built in also in unindustrialized societies, because they allow their baby, their toddler, to suckle and breastfeed until about 4 years of age. So while that's going on, they can't reproduce because that's just the way our bodies are. So there's that natural family planning built in also in their practices of rearing children.
Yeah, there's all kinds of natural regulating mechanisms. The biggest thing is to just get the alien cortex out of the way. That's the only thing messing everything up.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the questions from the lake in the Mahabharata, where like I think it was like the lake or Brahmin or whatever asked him, "What is madness?" And then Yudhishthira is like, "A forgotten way."
Yeah, it's an upside down world. It's an inverted world. Sanity is labeled insanity and vice versa.
One day when I was walking with some of those Bedouins I was telling you about sanity, we were walking along the beach as usual in the morning, and I came suddenly to that kind of heart. Well, they had some shacks that they would just leave and go, like fishermen's places. But there was one place that had been completely done up. There was kind of bricks and mortar, and there was a rope in front, and there was palm trees planted around it. And I said, "What's that?" Oh, he said, "No, that guy is crazy." And I said, "What do you mean?" But he's mad. He's put a door and he's put a fence around his place, and for them, that was insanity. That guy was crazy. He had probably traveled and seen that people put a fence around the place. So, and that's how they all called him mad, like he was just insane.
Yeah, yeah, you could see it from that perspective too, because like nature doesn't see the borders and boundaries of the alien cortex as legitimate. That's why like wild animals always cross fences into farms, because that shit, it's just an illusion basically. People put a fence up and think, oh, this is going to keep you out, and it's like, no, no, it's not. That fence is illegitimate.
Anyway, for us city folks, we can't really go back to that right now.
Well, this city that I live in is already like that, because the Greenland law is that the land, every piece of land belongs to everyone, like the state or the government or to you and me. So that means that even here in the city center, there are no fences, because they would actually by law be unlawful or illegitimate. And you also see people, children and grown-ups alike, just walking between the houses in what would be the gardens or whatever. And I used to think that they were kind of cheeky, why naughty people? Why are they doing that? Are they sort of thieves or no? It's everybody does it because everybody knows that every square meter of outside area belongs to everyone. So it's like you take a shortcut around the walls of a house because that's easier for where you're going. And I kind of like it. I'm sort of it grows on you, the feeling that there's no private property
Are you
outside.
accepting immigrants or refugees?
I think that's pretty strict. If you have a work permit and stuff, then you can come here and work for that employer. But it's like special rules for Scandinavians and stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of things to look into.
So the fences are invisible.
Yeah, and nobody. of course, there are some fences around some old colonial gardens down by the fjord and stuff, but that's like more like to keep the plants in. I think it almost seems because you have some trees and some gardens and stuff. I don't know, but it's basically people don't have fences, and yeah, joggers, people who are running, orienteering or whatever, they just run around the houses, take shortcuts all over. And if you're going over the hill over to the main hospital, you just take the shortest way up the bedrock, up the hill, and between the houses. And nobody ever. I used to sort of feel that I was intruding or trespassing when I did that, because you sort of walk on people's staircases and stuff in outside their houses, but there's nothing wrong about it. Everybody does it, and it's just the law of the land or the lack thereof, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. The whole ownership thing, I always sort of intuited from the time I was a little kid, was just so screwed up. It seemed to, on the very basic level, just fail sort of the pros and cons list. I mean,
Well, what do
all,
kids do? They trespass. They're always crossing fences and
yeah,
going to neighbors' gardens to steal fruit. And the kids, they never, they never respect that.
yeah, no, they don't care. But even when you see them start to take ownership of things or say, this is my toy or whatever, it almost always leads to disagreement between the kids themselves. It seems to engender a lot more negativity than it
But it's
does.
because they're taught that. Because they
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
parents tell them that's yours. But I'm nearly sure that if they were never told anything about it, there wouldn't be any such thing as
Oh,
fighting over my toy. I
no,
know.
definitely
I
not.
can see animals when they have something that they really like. They defend it. I don't know. Does it come out of a sense of ownership though? I think it's more. It's another purpose. But a lot of this idea of mine is alien cortex is parents, society created, and yeah, totally.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of an interesting story I read that was based on actual observation of bald eagles. So in like their migration, they'd gather at like I can't remember this lake's name, but they had a lot of fish. It was all plentiful, so all the eagles were just lounging, and the new arrivals would be hungry, right? So they'd start fishing. And then the eagles that were fed and full, they would fly out and knock the fish out of their talons or steal them. And it turns out they were just doing that to like fuck with the newcomers. They're just playing with them. And because they wanted to fly. Yeah, it wasn't a whole domination thing. They were just bored they were just bored and wanted to play.
It's so funny. When I was a kid, I used to really love reading about animals and all this, and I've noticed just in the short time since I was a kid that so many of the assumptions of animal behavior are all through the lens of the alien cortex. So they always think everything's about domination and competition and stuff like that. But it's very funny, even in just a matter of years, how often they have to switch the story because their explanation for something is, yeah, it's a dispute or whatever. And then they see another example of supposedly the same thing where, yeah, it turns out they're just playing. It's so funny. I see it happen time and time and time and time and time again. They're always wrong.
Yeah, and the nature documentaries where they say competition like 50 times, like it's
It's
so bad.
ridiculous.
I can't watch nature documentaries anymore because they be on this spiel about competition, then the birds are just sitting in the tree singing. It's like, dude, get over
Yeah,
it. Get over it.
you have to watch it on mute. Yeah, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, I should watch it on mute and play some classical music. It'd be way
Yeah,
better.
totally 100%. If you I think Hugh said it once, but if you just go out into nature and try to see this cutthroat tooth and nail competition, you're going to be out there for a very very long time. It's just not how things work.
Yeah, not at all. And it's like I saw this one video with this raven messing with this rat. Like the raven would pull the rat's tail and drag him a little bit and flap around to the other side. And the person was talking about how cruel that was, but the rat would jump at the raven. They were playing. They were fucking playing. Get over it.
I've seen the same thing with a cat. Yeah, the ravens really love to do that. There's tons of them around here, and they're super interesting animals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a sign of like real intelligence is when like a creature is playful like that and try and have some fun.
I've seen them, not in real life, but I've seen them on video pitting two cats against each other sometimes. So one will have its back turned to the other, and then they'll jump up behind it, and then they'll pull its tail to make it look like the other cat did it, and they'll just keep going back and forth between the two of them until they start fighting with each other. But it's not really a serious fight. It's like kind of nasty. It's not cruel or anything, but it is kind of funny. It's evident that they're getting entertainment out of it.
Yeah, they're trolling. They're fucking trolling.
Don't the hunter-gatherers spend about 3/4 of their time playing too? Because they don't. That's what most anthropologists would conclude of their lifestyle. So you know they have plenty of time for that.
Yeah, the idea that you need to be busy 24/7 is just not true. Again, go out into nature and show me an animal that's busy 24/7. They spend most of their time hanging out, like any animal does. You have to work when you have to work, of course, but you know it's necessary for life. When the predator is chasing you, you gotta haul ass. But yeah, it's a compulsion we have in our culture, in a slave culture that's indoctrinated to be working and productive 24/7, and in your downtime you have to be doing stuff that is conducive for productivity, all that kind of jazz. How to sleep like most efficiently, all that stuff. It's nonsense.
Well, I'm going to have to leave you because I have an animal there who wants to go out. So I have to obey the law of the nose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I have to continue my lying around and gazing at the window. So I'll be busy all afternoon doing that.
Yeah, no, that's a good place to call it, I think.
Should we end it? Yeah. All right, so let's just fall still for a moment. Okay, and we'll end it with Om Param Mane Nama Iti. All right, thank you everybody for joining.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
you,
guys.